Welcome to Agam's lecture series, part 4, a lecture series designed to bring learning to the comfort of your homes. We'll continue our discussion on General Biology 1, GNS 132, with the topic reproduction in living organisms. Reproduction in living organisms. What is reproduction? Reproduction is the ability of a living organism to give birth to young ones. Why do living organisms reproduce? To have young ones that replace them when they die or when they go into extinct. There are basically two types of reproduction, namely asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is a type of reproduction whereby only one parent is involved. There are different types of asexual reproduction. As we have on the board, we have binary fission, whereby an organism divides into two, starting with the nucleus and the entire protoplasm divides. We have spore formation, whereby a nucleus divides into so many pieces, and each of these pieces with some protoplasm becomes an individual organism. We have budding, where there is a swelling of part of the organism, and mitosis or divisions of cells take place, and that part develops to become a new organism. We also have fragmentation, as we have in spirogyra, where a piece of an organism breaks off and regrows to become a full-fledged organism. We can give examples of this. Binary fission, you can see it in amoeba. Spore formation, you can see it in spirogyra. Budding, you can see it in hydra, and fragmentation, you can see it in spirogyra. Then we have under asexual reproduction, we have natural vegetative propagation, using the part of a body to reproduce it. Vegetative propagation. We have natural ones, like when you reproduce an organism using the roots, as we have in runners in plants. When you reproduce a plant using the stem, like stem tubers of yam, potato, cassava. When you reproduce an organism using the leaves, like leaves of onions, that onion bulb you eat are leaves, and that's what you use to reproduce the onion. Then we have artificial vegetative propagation. That's when you use the part of a plant to reproduce it artificially. Remember, the one we say here is what? Naturally. But this one is what? Artificially. Now, cutting. You want to have hibiscus flowers in your plant, you cut some stem and plant. You want to multiply your cassava stems, you cut some stem and plant. That is by what? Cutting. Grafting. You have a plant growing close to the soil. You bend the branch to touch the soil. That point where the plant is touching the soil, you use a sharp razor to scrape off the bark. Use a sharp razor to scrape off the bark and press it on the soil and cover it with sand. From that place you scraped up, roots will grow into the soil. Immediately the roots grow into the soil, you cut it from the major stem so that the major stem start growing on its own, and the new one start growing on its own. That is what? Layering. That's what? Layering. Then grafting. Grafting is that you come to a plant, you make a little incision or wound, and get the bud of another plant, put it in that incision, use cotton wool to cover it, put some Vaseline so that air and bacteria will not enter it, tie it like that. It will remain like that for some time. That bud from another plant will start growing into the old plant, and so that when both of them grow, the old plant will be like growing orange and the bud will be growing something like mango, but they are standing on the same stem. That type is what we call what? Grafting. Then marcotting is the same thing with layering, but instead of bending the plant to touch the soil, you just use a coconut husk to cover the plant and put small sand into it, so that when it starts growing into that small coconut husk, you now cut it from the main plant and carry it to another place and plant. That process is called what? Marcotting. This one is artificial vegetative propagation. Remember, the first one is that natural vegetative propagation, and all these are asexual type of what? Reproduction. Because asexual reproduction is a type of reproduction whereby only one parent is involved. In all this discussion, is only one parent. You cut a plant from one parent, binary fission from one parent, spore formation from one parent, from roots one parent. This is asexual. Only one parent is what? Involved. Whether the parent is male or female, it doesn't matter, because it's only one parent that is what? Involved. Then we now have sexual reproduction. We can have two: asexual and what? Sexual. Sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction involving what? Two parents of opposite what? Sexes, male sex and female sex. There are two processes involved in sexual reproduction. One is conjugation, whereby two organisms will pair up, their nucleus will fuse or fertilize, after which their nucleus will divide and different individuals will come out. That is conjugation. But in fusion is when a male introduces a sperm into the female, and the sperm and the egg will fuse in the female, and new organism will develop. That is what? Fusion. But both of them are types of what? Sexual reproduction. What is important about sexual reproduction? Two parents are what? Involved. And these two parents are what? Opposite sexes, male sex and female sex. The male sex produces what? Gametes. And gametes are what? Sex cells that take part in sexual reproduction. Now we look at some differences between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. These differences include that in asexual reproduction, one parent is involved, while in sexual, two parents are what? Involved. In asexual, the offsprings are identical, but in sexual, the offsprings may be identical or may not be what? Identical. Because from the same parents, you can have boys, you can have girls, you can have short people, you can have tall people. So they may be identical on the, but when it is asexual, they are usually what? Identical. Then the asexual encourages disease spread, because if there's already disease from the parents from where you developed, the disease will continue. But in asexual, disease is what? Reduced. Then also in asexual, there is high survival rate, but in sexual there is low survival rate. Then in asexual still, you have no new qualities are formed in the organism, but in the sexual, new qualities can be what? Formed. Then also in asexual, there are no variation, but in sexual you can have what? Variations or new varieties. Then also in asexual, they can start growing in one spot and become overcrowded, but in sexual you can do it at different positions so that you avoid what? Overcrowded. Let's now look briefly at a typical flowering plant. A typical flowering plant will have four basic parts. A typical flowering plant will have four basic parts. These four basic parts will include the brightly colored part called corolla or petal. Then the not too brightly colored called sepal or calyx. Then we have the male reproductive part of the flower, the stamen, and the female reproductive part of the flower, the pistil or carpel. So these four parts of the flower you notice: petal, sepal, stamen, pistil or what? Carpel. Four basic parts of a flower. Four basic parts of a flower. Then when you come to that four basic parts of a flower, we're now going to how flower reproduces. We have pollination. What is pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from anthers to stigma. Transfer of what? Pollen grains from anthers to stigma. This pollination can be of two types: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination and cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? When pollen grain from the anther of a flower falls on the stigma of the same flower, that is what? Self-pollination. Cross-pollination is when pollen grain from the anther of a flower falls to the stigma of another flower of the same plant of different what plant. That's what cross pollination. There are two agents of pollination, two agents that cause pollination: wind and what? Insect. So it's either the wind can carry the pollen grain to the stigma, or insect that come to suck nectar will carry it to the stigma. Insect pollinated flowers are called entomophilous flowers. Entomophilous flowers. Entomology is the study of insects. That's why it's entomophilous flowers. Wind pollinated flowers called anemophilous flowers. Anemophilous. Insect pollinated, wind pollinated. So there are two agents: those pollinated by insects, entomophilous, and those pollinated by what? Winds, anemophilous flowers. When these flowers are pollinated, pollination simply is what? The transfer of pollen grains from anthers to the what? Stigma. Let's now look at the structure of the internal structure of the flower. As you can be seen in this our drawing, this is a typical flower. This is the female part called pistil or carpel. See the stigma. This tube is the style, while this down here is the ovary. While down here is the what? Ovary. So what normally happens in a typical flower is that anther, pollen grain from this anther, will fall on this stigma, and the pollen grain will start going into the ovary to meet the ova for fertilization. Then you can see a good story of what is happening. Pollen grain has fallen on this stigma. It will absorb water, and as it's going down this pollen tube, the pollen grain will divide into two: degenerative nucleus and definitive nucleus and degenerative nucleus. When it now grows down through the pollen tube, it enters the ovary through an opening called micropyle and enters the ovum. At the center of the micropyle is the ovum. One of those tube nucleus will come and fertilize this ovum to become the seed of the plant, while the entire ovary and the ovarian parts will become the fruit surrounding the ovary. This is a story of how plants reproduce. In the second part of this lecture, we look at reproduction in animals with particular reference to mammal, especially us, man, so that we know how reproduction is achieved in our structures. Thank you, and if you are thrilled by this lecture, click on the red button and we'll see you in part 5 of the continuation of this reproduction. Thank you and God bless you.